All right, thanks so much, Brian. Let's go to CNN's David Chalian now, who has our very first exit poll of the night, which is about how much President Trump was a factor for voters in these key races. David?
Yeah, Jake, obviously this is the first electoral test for the president in a significant way. And in New Jersey, you can see that the president's approval rating is underwater. 43% of those voting in this New Jersey electorate approve of the job Donald Trump is doing. 55% disapprove. These are preliminary numbers, and they may shift as we get more information from voters throughout the night. To your point, Jake, about is Donald Trump a factor? Well, listen here. The plurality, 47% say Trump was not a factor in their vote. But where Trump was a factor, he was more a factor for people to oppose him. So 38% in New Jersey cast their ballot in opposition to Trump. 13% did so in support of Trump. We see a similar story in Virginia tonight. You see the president's approval rating in Virginia is even a tick lower than it is in New Jersey. 41% job approval for President Trump in Virginia, 56% disapproval. And the same kind of story we see here in terms of whether Trump was a factor for people voting in Virginia today. The plurality, 47%, roughly half say no, he wasn't a factor. But when he was a factor, it is a factor to oppose him. That's what, when he was a factor, people who wanted to cast a ballot did so to oppose Trump, 37% anyway. 15% said they were casting their ballot in Virginia to support Trump. We're going to take a look at some New York City residents and voters today and what's on their minds. Take a look here. How long have you lived in New York City? This is kind of the makeup of the electorate in New York City. Less than 5 years, 6%, 5 to 10 years, 8%. The bulk here of voters in New York City, look at that, 48% born in New York City. Do you own or rent the place you live in? 57% of voters in New York City are renters. That speaks directly to Zohran Mamdani's key promise to freeze the rent for a portion of them. 39% say they own their home in New York City. Do you consider yourself a Democratic socialist, like the Democratic nominee? 26% say yes. 69% say no. And is this the first time you have voted for mayor in New York City? 17% of voters in this election, according to these preliminary exit poll results, say they are first-time voters, Jake. And I will say, usually, first-time voters, a big chunk of them are younger voters because they're new to the electorate. 4 years ago in the mayor's race, it was only 9% of young voters in the electorate. It'll be curious to see if this is a big youth surge with all this first-time voting in the New York City mayor's race.
We have been texting with, I've been texting throughout the night with sources who've agreed to kind of talk to us, give us their perspective. And Brad Todd, Republican consultant, is actually in Virginia. He's working with Jason Miyares, the Attorney General candidate. And he says this: in Virginia, I'm watching for split-ticket voting. He says the Spanberger-Miyares voter is the most interesting voter anywhere tonight. And Kristen Soltis Anderson chimes in to say that her polling does show that there actually is likely to be a fair amount of this ticket splitting. The question here is really about the nature of our politics, right? And how are voters feeling about that? And that has come up repeatedly also among my sources. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell has also joined us and given us some of her insights. And she's someone who's really thought a lot about the Democratic Party, their future. She's been on the leading edge sometimes. And she points out that voters are really not inspired by politicians right now. She says they're tired of excuses, negative hits, attacks on their opponents. And, that plays into kind of the big picture question we've talked about, too, with Zohran Mamdani and the type of candidate that he is, right? I mean, there's obviously Republicans are hitting him on policies, but he's running as a candidate who is inspiring people. He's at clubs, right? People are cheering. They're excited to see him. It is a very different vibe, so to speak. And certainly that also plays into, to circle back around, Jay Jones, the Democrat who was on track to win the Attorney General's
The guy
race,
who wrote the text messages.
who wrote these text messages about political violence, is really the opposite, I think, of what people are looking for.
Virginia has a long history, with only a couple of exceptions, of voting against the party in the White House in its governor's race. So Spanberger has a head start right there. Costs are up. You're in the middle of government shutdown, 150,000 federal workers in Virginia, so you think the dynamic goes her way. But to the point that Debbie Dingell makes and others make is that, how does Trump win after January 6th? How is Mamdani creating a movement? People are looking for people who do things differently, who challenge, kick the can, kick the establishment. And so I do think it's an interesting question. I get it. She might be the next governor. She doesn't want a Republican attorney general who's a friend of Trump, who's allied with conservatives on many of these issues when states are constantly suing the federal government and so on and so forth. I get the politics of it. But I think voters would find it refreshing if you looked up and said, that is reprehensible. And that person does not belong in our politics because that's reprehensible. I have children, and I have to go home to my children and say, never do these things, or you will be held accountable.
But it goes back to that, right and wrong.
Right.
You will be held accountable versus what we've been talking about, and we will continue to talk about, which is that people can't afford groceries.
Right.
They can't afford to buy a house. Never mind that. They can't afford rent. And that is the number one thing that is on people's mind, even when you think about democracy or other issues like
But this idea that I don't have to address it because I'm going to win anyway, I think it's going to be fascinating. If she wins and if he squeaks in, the attorney general squeaks in, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him.
There's another part of this, though, when it comes to Democrats, which is Democrats perceiving themselves as having always taken the high road. I'm not saying they do, but there is this perception among Democrats that they do, and saying, no more. We're not going to do this anymore. Then for that, you have Newsom when it comes to the redistricting in California. And CNN projects that former Democratic Congresswoman and CIA case officer Abigail Spanberger will be elected the governor of Virginia, defeating the Commonwealth's sitting lieutenant governor, Republican Winsome Earl Sears. Abigail Spanberger will become the very first woman governor in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Again, CNN projects that Abigail Spanberger will be elected governor of Virginia. And we can now make a projection in the Virginia lieutenant governor's race. CNN projects that Democrat Ghazala Hashmi will be elected the lieutenant governor of Virginia, defeating Republican John Reed. Hashmi will be the very first Muslim and first Indian American to ever hold the job. She's also the first Muslim woman elected statewide in the country. Again, CNN projects that Democrat Ghazala Hashmi will be elected lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. All right, we can now make a major projection in the New Jersey governor's race. CNN projects the Democratic Congresswoman and former Navy helicopter pilot Mikey Sherrill will be elected the next governor of New Jersey. Mikey Sherrill defeating Republican former State Assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli for the first time in 60 years. Democrats will hold on to the governor's seat in the Garden State for 3 consecutive terms. Sherrill will also become the state's first female Democratic governor. They previously had Republican governor who was a woman. Again, CNN projecting that Democrat Mikey Sherrill will be elected governor of New Jersey. We can now make a major projection in the New York City mayor's race. CNN projects that Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic candidate, will be elected the next mayor of New York, New York, defeating former New York governor turned independent Andrew Cuomo and Republican Curtis Sliwa. Mamdani's victory marking an historic moment in the city. At the age of 34, he will be the city's youngest mayor in a century. He will also be New York City's very first Muslim mayor. Again, CNN projecting that Zohran Mamdani will be the next mayor of New York, New York. CNN projects that Democrat Jay Jones will be elected Attorney General of Virginia, the Democrat defeating the sitting Attorney General, Republican Jason Miyares. This means Democrats have won all 3 statewide races in the Commonwealth of Virginia, because CNN has projected that former Democratic Congresswoman and CIA case officer Abigail Spanberger will be elected governor of Virginia, with Democrat Ghazala Hashmi winning the second top job of lieutenant governor. 3 huge victories for Democrats tonight. Nationally, we have 2 women elected governors in Virginia and New Jersey, and then Zohran Mamdani becoming New York City's first Muslim mayor, the Democratic candidate there defeating independent and Republican candidates. All U.S. House maps, and we can make a projection in California. The polls are closed as of now, and CNN projects that Californians have indeed voted yes on the state's newly drawn congressional district map, aiming to help Democrats win an additional up to 5 U.S. House seats in the 2026 midterm elections in 1 year. This victory marking a huge win for California Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat who framed this vote as a chance for his state to rebuke President Trump and to make it easier to deny him a Republican-controlled House for his final 2 years in office. Again, CNN projecting the Californians have voted yes on Prop 50 to implement the state's newly drawn U.S. House map.